Anarcho-capitalists are often met with the criticisms that anarcho-capitalism has never existed, therefore you should not be an anarcho-capitalist. This argument is bad for many reasons. The first one is that just because something has never happened before doesn't mean we can't advocate for it to happen in the future. People don't apply this standard to anything else, so it's ridiculous that they should apply it to anarcho-capitalists. The second reason this is a bad criticism is that just because anarcho-capitalism, as described by modern anarcho-capitalist intellectuals, has never existed, does not mean that various aspects of anarcho-capitalism have and do exist. Me and some of my YouTuber friends decided to pour through history and show you guys examples of historical and modern anarcho-capitalism, not only examining anarcho-capitalist cities and societies, but also aspects of anarcho-capitalism such as examples of private law or examples of private welfare. If you have not seen the other videos, I highly recommend going back and starting with Anglo-Libertarian's video on Cospaia, the anarcho-capitalist city in Italy, and check out the other videos in the series, such as the one on the Wild West, the one on private welfare and fraternal societies, and the other on the history of anarchism in Ukraine. By the time this video is published, there may be other videos in this series. I will link them all in the description. So without further ado, let's talk about the anarcho-capitalism of the Acadians. Acadians are the descendants of a group of French-speaking settlers who migrated from coastal France in the late 16th century to establish a French colony called Acadia. Acadia was contested by both the French and the British for decades. The Acadians went back and forth from being under the rule of the British to the French, but they never subjected themselves to either government. They much preferred a policy of self-governance. In the 1630s, Acadia did have a sort of state, but this ultimately led to a civil war that ended in 1654. As a result, the Acadians switched to a form of self-governance. The period from 1655 to 1755 was considered to be stateless. But in typical anarcho-capitalist fashion, the absence of a state did not imply the absence of rules of governance. The Acadians developed institutions called Parish Assemblies for coordinating collective action. These institutions relied heavily on high levels of consensus in their decision-making, and they possessed no coercive abilities. Under this system of self-governance, the Acadians remained neutral in this disputed territory. There were times in which the Acadians did make pledges of allegiance to England, but they always refused to take any oath that did not include a recognition of their property rights, freedom of religion, and the right to bear arms for them and their allies, the Mi'kmaq Indians. The Acadians also found various ways to evade taxes. So despite this on-paper allegiance to England, the Acadians still lived in statelessness. One of the most notable historical facts about the Acadians and statelessness is their close relationship with the Mi'kmaq Indians, who equally lived under statelessness. The two groups settled into complementary roles in the global economy, with the Mi'kmaq harvesting furs and trading them with the Acadians for food and European technology. Both groups prospered and began to intermarry. One of the main reasons for this peaceful relationship is the system of statelessness and private property. Not only did the Acadians respect the private property of the Mi'kmaq Indians, but they recognized that trading with them, rather than raiding them, was much more beneficial to both parties, especially since the Acadians did not have a central military funded by taxpayers, meaning any sort of conflict had to be funded by private individuals. This is in contrast to Quebec, which maintained a state. Quebec had significant amounts of violence, especially when compared to Acadia. Historian David Jones describes the peacefulness between the Acadians and the Mi'kmaq Indians, saying the Acadians lived largely free of the continual threat of imminent native attack or insurrection, a luxury enjoyed by few other settler frontiers on the continent. So now that we've established the anarchist part, what about the capitalism? The Acadians and Mi'kmaq enjoyed a free market. This free market led to great expansion in their wealth and quality of living. Credible estimates of Acadian wealth from before the 1755 deportation suggest that it was not only richer than New France, but was probably richer than the original France itself. Looking at agricultural statistics and comparing Acadia to the other French colony, Quebec, in 1701, numbers of cattle, sheep, and swine per capita stood at 1.59, 1.58, and 1.03. In Quebec in 1706, the same rates were much lower, at 0.86, 0.11, and 0.45 per capita. GDP per capita showed the Acadians to have been exceptionally rich. Unfortunately, this great society of peace and prosperity came to an end in 1755, when the British government began to forcibly remove the Acadians. Over 7,000 Acadians were deported. The Mi'kmaq Indians lost their close friends and trading partners, and had them replaced with neighbors that had an organized state behind them. The British government began to regulate their economic activities and placed the Mi'kmaq in an inferior legal status. The Acadians were spread out all over the place, some in Nova Scotia, and some being brought back to France. Many later ended up in Louisiana and later became the Cajun French. Had this deportation not happened, it's quite possible that the great success of the Acadians would have spread beyond Acadia to the rest of North America, and we'd be living in a very different North America today. Unfortunately, we will never have the opportunity to find out. But what we do know is that Acadia was essentially an anarcho-capitalist society, which compared to its peers was incredibly peaceful and incredibly wealthy. What we do see is that self-governance can work, and people don't need a state to keep them peaceful. They don't need a state to regulate their economic activities. These people didn't even need to be culturally, ethnically, or religiously homogenous. They lived alongside the Mi'kmaq Indians and showed it was much more beneficial and moral to respect the property rights and autonomy of peaceful Native American tribes. Hopefully one day soon we will get to see a modern Acadia arise, whether it be in North America or anywhere else. And hopefully this time it will end much differently.